The Seafarer Happiness Index has become the bellwether for measuring the welfare of crew on board vessels. In this episode of the Seatrade Maritime Podcast, we talk to Stephen Jones about what led to him to set up the index a decade ago. Joining him will be Ben Bailey, talking about how the mission to seafarers came to be involved. Welcome to the podcast, Ben and Stephen. Firstly, can you just briefly introduce ourselves to our listeners?
I'm Ben Bailey. I'm the Director of Programme for the Mission to Seafarers, one of the largest maritime charities in the world, operating in 200 ports in 50 countries.
Hi, I'm Stephen Jones. I'm the founder of the Seafarers Happiness Index, and I work alongside the Mission to Seafarers to examine how seafarers are feeling about their lives at sea. Great to be here.
Thank you both for taking the time to talk to our listeners today about something that I think has become kind of almost like a bellwether for how seafarers are feeling in the industry. And I'd like to turn to yourself, Stephen, to start off and just ask you, what made you decide to set up the Seafarer Happiness Index, and how did you go about that?
Sure. I'm a former seafarer myself, so I think that was always in the back of my mind. And I think as well, perhaps even more importantly than that, I'm a child of a seafarer. So there's a few lenses through which I've always kind of wanted to support seafarers to ensure that they're better understood, the challenges, the conditions, the realities of life at sea. I was working with a company who had a social media platform aimed at seafarers called Crew2, and this was about 10 years ago. We were pondering how to engage with seafarers and what their needs were. We looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is about how humans kind of feel about the interactions they have throughout their life and what they need. And the big question was, well, what do seafarers need? So we wanted to examine that, and we thought wrapping it in the kind of the layers of happiness might be something that everyone could understand and engage with and be interesting as well. That was always part of the desire. So that's really where the genesis of the Seafarers Happiness Index came about.
How did you work with them to set that up in terms of the idea of a survey and all these sort of things?
Well, we started with 10 questions because we were doing it on the cheap on SurveyMonkey, and 10 questions was free. So from that kind of inauspicious starting point, we actually found that that worked really well. So it was just making it as simple as possible to engage with as many seafarers as possible as well. So really, there you go, 10 questions. How happy do you feel about your general happiness, connectivity, shore leave, welfare, all these issues that we felt were the building blocks of making seafarers happier, and then of harnessing that concept of happiness to reflect back on what it was to be a seafarer today at sea.
Okay, so a very simple sort of concept.
Yep.
If you're enjoying the Seatrade Maritime Podcast, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on the app of your choice. Turning to Ben, how did the Mission to Seafarers become involved in this project once it was up and running?
Yeah, well, we were always really interested in the way the Happiness Index was being created and the buzz around it. And as Stephen says, actually, the simplicity. You know, so often when we're on board ships around the world, seafarers want to talk to us about some of the issues they're facing. And of course, a lot of that conversation is very in-depth. But this seemed to be a really interesting and an ideal and easy way for seafarers to tell the industry what they were thinking. The mission came on board around 2017. And for us, it feels very much kind of just a natural extension of our work around the ports. Around 500,000 seafarers and their families are assisted by my colleagues in those 200 ports in 50 countries every year. And as I say, this really just, we felt it gave us the opportunity to be that impartial listener and to actually share with industry without judgment about what things were going right and what things were going wrong, but to actually say, look, this is the reality of what seafarers are telling us on the ground. And then actually passing the baton to industry and basically saying, well, what are you going to do about it?
So this, in a sense, enabled you to quantify what you were hearing kind of on a more ad hoc basis when you were visiting ships and so forth.
Yeah, very, very much so. That there is always, when we're on board, long conversations ranging from, football to how unhappy they are about their lack of shore leave or the amount of paperwork they've got on board or the fact they've got a new cook and they don't like the menu or whatever it might be. And this became just sort of a space where seafarers could talk about what they were feeling, as I say, without fear, without judgment, but also a space which really I feel has become theirs, something that they actually can own and can be a part of. And the fact that it's an anonymous survey, the fact that we don't do it under strict scientific rules when carrying out surveys means that we're able to really pick up the sort of the bellwether, the temperature of what seafarers are thinking at a particular time. And one of the things I'm always so fascinated and also reassured about is that very often, the results that we're getting very often mirror those formal surveys which are carried out by institutions and which are equally needed. But this provides its own space for seafarers to talk in their own terms about what's important to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I was thinking about before this episode was like, so how do you actually measure happiness? I know there is an actual index number that you come out with every quarter. And you said it's not particularly scientific how this survey is put together. So how does it all come together?
I think, better philosophers and psychiatrists than we could perhaps ever be struggle really with the subjective nature of happiness. And so we're not there to try and question what happiness is. I think the alchemy that we're trying to kind of really roll out is to drive a narrative through the subjective into objective. So if you ask enough seafarers how they feel, all of a sudden you do start to have patterns and a realistic insight into what is impacting life at sea. So that's really what the focus has been, on gathering enough data to start to spot the patterns, which we can then take to drive the narrative. So the data is used really to be that constant ongoing hook that engages and provides interest and some use as well, particularly more so when we have bespoke Seafarers Happiness Indices done with companies. There's far more kind of focus on the data and the changes and the challenges within that. But this is really about creating a mechanism to have that barometer of sentiment, we call it. So it is very much just to be able to plot the pressure points to see where they are, and of then what we can talk to industry and also be reflected back to us on the changes that can come from this.
And you've stuck to this sort of 10 questions format from the start, haven't you?
Yeah, because it works. It really does give us the most simple way of both engaging. I know myself as being a seafarer, and seafarers do tell us, the last thing they want is to spend loads of time trying to kind of engage with the shore, with spending, how many questions would be enough to make someone turn off? I would, wager not many more than 10. So really it is about keeping that real momentum in this. And there seems to be enough scope and latitude within those 10 questions for seafarers to be able to explore whatever issues they feel are impacting them within that. So 10 has been, the number. It makes the maths easier as well, so that helps. But it seems to have worked, and hopefully will that continue.
How many seafarers do you actually survey these days on a sort of quarterly basis?
It waxes and wanes, and the answer I always give to that is we never have enough. We always want more. Until it's 1.9 million that are responding with us, we have to keep that energy up to try to engage more. It waxes and wanes. It's hard to predict, but I'd say anywhere between kind of 5 and 10,000 a quarter. So we roughly think of about kind of 30,000 probably throughout a year. We also make sure that we're able to harness the stories that come to us from the ship visitors, from chaplains, and also the social channels as well. So while the surveys are those kind of numbers that for the data, for the actual experiential insights, then it's far wider than that. And we try to make sure we're harnessing every seafarer that tells us something. We feel honor bound to try to make sure that those lessons are listened to and form part of the solutions.
And I guess from the point of view of the mission seafarer, Ben, that's where part of your input comes in as well, then the chaplains and so forth and the feedback they get.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when our teams are going on board, they promote the survey. They very often use some of the questions as part of a sort of conversation starter with seafarers. And all of our centres around the world have the ability where seafarers can take part in the survey there and then. And as Stephen says, the stories, the voices that we get through, we're actually providing a platform for quite a lot of people for whom, if they weren't part of a sample, a chosen sample of people that they wanted to be, what the company wanted surveyed, actually they wouldn't necessarily get the opportunity to have their voice, and so that's really important. And as Stephen says, we have so many interesting comments in a variety of languages, and in a variety of tones. Some good, some not so good, some printable, quite a lot unprintable, but actually a place where seafarers can share what their reality is, and giving that voice is just so important, and as I said, is absolutely akin to who we are as an organization and what we're trying to achieve.
Many of the good shipping companies run their own surveys, engage with seafarers, whatever they do, and that's brilliant. So at a certain level, there's an inherent natural relationship and voice between seafarers and the employers, the ship owners. What this does, it allows those seafarers probably below those levels in the kind of lower reaches, if you like, of shipping to have a voice and a say, and to be able to shape the narrative and the stories that get told as well. Whereas otherwise they might be out of the conversation. And all of a sudden, if we're ignoring vast swathes of our seafaring workforce, then we're not getting the realistic image reflected back to us. So I think that's so important that we can reach so much further than inevitably would be the case.
So it's about giving a voice to everyone who's at sea.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah. Now, you do also have your own sort of corporate partners within this. And what role do they play and how important is that?
Well, they are hugely important to the life of the Happiness Index in order to create it, to maintain it, to sustain it, and to promote it. And we wouldn't be able to do as much as we have been able to do without the support of IDWAL, with North Standard, and most recently Inmarsat, who came on board just a few years ago. They have a really important role in promoting and sustaining the index, but also I know that they will often use it internally to reflect on some of their own policies, as do a number of our corporate partners for whom they have chosen to take out bespoke indices, as Stephen mentioned. This industry is, dare I say, obsessed with the term benchmarking, but actually it's a really important thing to do, and we have so many corporate organizations who use the index to take the temperature of their own crews. And so I really feel that, had we not had that support from IDWAL, North Standard, and Inmarsat over the years, we actually wouldn't be able to provide the index in the way that we have been able to, and to really create and drive this momentum for which we're able to celebrate a decade of Stephen and the team's hard work this year.
Excellent. You mentioned the bespoke surveys for individual corporate entities. So these are companies that approach you and say they want something more specific. How does it work?
Yes, they can be ship owners, they can be charterers, they can be cargo owners, and they will approach us and ask us to do a regular survey of their fleet. And they can choose to do that once a year, every quarter, however it wants. There's a lot of flexibility within that. But as I say, it's an opportunity for them to take the temperature of their own crews and to compare and contrast with what the global data is telling them. And I think where we have seen some really encouraging practice and behavior is where those corporate clients are then actually going back to their seafarers and saying, actually, we've listened to you, we hear what you say about a particular issue, and this is what we're going to do about it to bring about some change. And I can point to a number of those organizations that are really utilizing the index in the way that I think perhaps we'd always dreamed that it would turn into, which is, someone listening and then someone saying, I've heard you, and actually them responding and hopefully then bringing about positive change.
I mean, that's great to sort of hear that happens at a corporate level. If we look at the wider index and the report that's put out quarterly, how do you translate the sort of results of that survey into sort of real action on a broader level in the industry?
It's always been the aim to do that. It was never about creating a kind of passive listening reporting and then going away. So it has always been the focus to try to translate what is being said and the lessons that we're learning into real change. But that's the hard bit. It's easy to listen, it's easy to report back. It is harder to then try to get into the weeds of systematic change. I think totally the partnership between the Mission to Seafarers and having this as a tool within their kind of sandbox to make change happen is hugely important. We've had roundtables, we've brought together industry. We're hopeful that when we get the messages out, when we engage with the media, when we tell the stories that are happening, that these drive some kind of change themselves. But equally, we're looking at a range of different projects and ideas and innovations that can try to move the dial back. Ultimately, we want seafarers to be happy. This is the mechanism to measure that. So we're there trying to create this virtuous uplift and a symbiotic relationship between what seafarers tell us and the change that we can then drive forward. So that's really where we're trying to engage with industry to take these ideas from seafarers, to take the ideas from industry back, and then start to create the actual mechanisms of change. And I think issues like bringing ports more in line with actual solutions rather than being able to be kind of one step removed is incredibly important. Issues such as shore leave really are having such an incredible impact, and we need to be able to make some noticeable, meaningful change in that regard.
Ben, if you look on the point of view of the mission, are you seeing those changes actually happening?
I think, like anything within this industry, it's a fairly slow burner. I think we are seeing at least people being open to having those conversations, and as Stephen says, attending those roundtables and people actually with passion and importantly the position to be able to drive change at their senior levels. It's been great to work with some very passionate people from industry, but we've got a long way to go, and the index reflects that. But I think the important thing is that we've finally got a place at the table, so to speak, in terms of where those agenda items can be discussed. And in many ways, the pandemic was sort of a good thing for the index because it really brought to light some of those really, on many levels, quite basic issues that seafarers were facing. But actually, the thing, these are issues that industry can, if it puts its mind to it, make some real tangible change and transformational change for the lives of those who are working on board. So we're not there yet. A bit like the mental health conversation, which really has taken probably the last 10 years before the industry has started to talk about those things. I'm hopeful that it won't take another decade for us to change things such as shore leave or get maybe, the length of contracts or indeed other issues, training, etc., that are going on, that are happening in the industry. But we're certainly beginning to see some roots and shoots of change, and that's really important.
No, definitely. And it's good to hear that, and that is actually being translated on the ground or starting to be. Just come back to you, Stephen. When you started this out 10 years ago, did it ever occur to you to be where you are at now?
I'm hopelessly naive and optimistic. So, yes. But the journey to get here has not been simple. I think it's been like any journey, you start with the first step, etc. And having the support of the mission, working with Ben and his team within the mission has been so important. And I think as well, it's been the willingness of people within the industry, various leaders, people with passion and energy who've engaged with this conceptually and who want to push it forward. That has really been the foundation on which this is in a position to help drive change. As Ben says, we've got a long way to go, but from that starting point of why don't we ask seafarers how they feel? Oh my gosh, seafarers are telling us how they feel. What do we do with it? We're starting to be in a position to really, influence change. And it is fantastic to go to events, to read things online and see the voices of seafarers reflected back as something of a stepping stone towards solutions rather than just here's more problems. We can start to really shift the dial and start to have the proper conversation with seafarers, a dialogue about the changes that they want, what their experiences are, and of what is needed to change that and move things forward. So much more to be done, but I'm very, very pleased, heartened, and feel that the progress has been as it would always have hoped to be.
As you say, much more to be done, and I think both Ben and Stephen, what's next for the index?
Well, we've got a lot of ideas, little time, but we've got a lot of ideas, and it would be absolutely remiss of me not to pay tribute to Stephen and his energy and enthusiasm for this project. As he says, it's been incredibly difficult sometimes to drive change, to get people interested, to get industry interested, and that momentum has slowly really built into a steady rhythm, and it's extraordinary when I think where we started and where we now are. I think we're looking at trying to make it easier for seafarers to take part in the survey. I'm also really interested in finding ways for seafarers themselves to maybe be able to chart their sort of own personal levels of satisfaction at certain times. They already can do elements of that through our app, Happy at Sea, but there will inevitably be more that we can do there. Ultimately, I think I would love to get to a point where actually, and maybe this is sort of wishful thinking, but almost creating a kind of flag state table of happiness, and actually trying to then bring in the regulators and the other actors and the wider actors within the sector to see what change they can drive and what pressure they can put from their perspectives to ensure that those people that are working on board have the best possible experiences. So there are definitely a lot of things that we can do, but ultimately it is about ensuring that industry listens to the voice of the seafarer and is challenged to respond to them.
Yeah, I'd add that, from my perspective, I think because seafarers take the time and effort to tell us how they feel and their experiences, and we're so utterly dependent on that and grateful for every single seafarer that does. So that allows us to absolutely be at the vanguard of the real issues that come up. And, conversations we've had like the design of accommodation, the fact that, seafarers dreading going into port, not just that they don't get shore leave, but it's absolutely the whole kind of culture of seafaring has changed on its head, in that we always used to look forward to going into port for a bit of rest, recreation, whatever. Now it's absolutely turned on its head, the opposite. Issues like access to drinking water, the feeding rates across the lower echelons of the industry. We're getting the real stories. And so being able to be at the vanguard of reporting on the issues, I think it's all about now growing that influence and making sure we take the entire industry along with us to try to reflect what is happening, those realities, and what changes we can start to implement.
Those are some pretty basic issues there, like things like access to drinking water.
I was utterly astonished, and it was probably about 2 years ago, I think, something that started to become in, and there was enough mentions of it that it was like, and you read in the data we get back and you think, no, this, wow, what a terrible ship they're on. And then there's more and more. I suspect what happened is that a lot of vessels, their drinking water tanks were not being inspected during COVID. The cement had kind of degraded inside. The cost of replacing and making the tanks good again was seen as not an investment they wanted to make. Bottled water, plastic bottles were coming on. Then that was decided that you shouldn't really have bottled water coming on. The net result, a series of bad decisions with unintended consequences, made it seem that there was just not enough drinking water on certain vessels. And that is the net result, seafarers in the 21st century being thirsty, which staggers belief. And, if we then think about how much work we've got to do and how far, those type of issues are exactly that.
Although I think on the flip side, that shows the power that this survey has had, that you actually expose issues like that, which we wouldn't probably have thought of.
Hopefully, yeah, and that's what we exist to do, and that's where we're absolutely honor bound to try to reflect and give the value back to the seafarers, put their trust and respect in this process. They're there for us to support and have them with the metaphorical, figurative seat around the table to get the genuine issues out that they're experiencing.
If we have listeners who actually want to get involved in the survey in some way, what would they have to do? Is there sort of things you're looking for from the industry?
Well, the number one thing we'd like particularly ship owners and operators to be doing, and crewing managers, is to be continuing to promote it to their seafarers. I have lost track of the number of CEOs who have said to me, I just never thought to ask these types of questions, both in terms of sort of being shocked at the simplicity, but also being shocked at the fact that they were getting responses, and so what we really need is industry to continue to get behind this and to continue to promote it to their seafarers, and ultimately for seafarers to continue to share their thoughts. The bottom line is, as I often say to them, if you want to have your voice heard, there are a number of ways in which you can do that. But I would argue that one of the most effective is through the Seafarers Happiness Index. And certainly there are a number of ways that they can do that, not least by going to seafarershappinessindex.org. So I might as well get a plug in there whilst we can. But, absolutely, that if they want to have their voice heard, if industry wants to be part of that discussion, we all need to work together in promoting and listening to what seafarers are telling us.
Okay, great. And I really hope that more people do get involved and ensure that the seafarers have a voice. Ben and Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to our listeners today.
Real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Seatrade Maritime Podcast, and we look forward to joining you on our next episode.